So I'm thinking about changing the name of our bathroom from the John to the Gym. And the reason for that is every morning, I can tell people every morning I go to the gym. And, first thing, yeah. Spent a lot of time there. So we're in this journey through the book of Exodus, and we've sort of had a diversion through the Advent season, and so I want to bring us back to that journey and talk a little bit about it. And I started out with that kind of a pun because part of the issue in understanding Exodus is understanding an ancient language that was written literally thousands of years ago. And there are some phrases, there are some expressions that are used, there are even some of the ways that they write that we simply don't understand what they're talking about, or it's vague, it's confusing. And so we need to keep that in mind as we're reading this and as we're studying that. And let me just give you an example of that. There's a phrase we'll come to later on where it's talking about the sacrifice, where it says to put your hand upon the sacrifice. And we don't know why that is or what that means to them. That was something that meant something to them, but we don't understand what it means. So some people think, well, that means to identify, but it doesn't exactly fit because there are other offerings. That's a sin offering that where it's mentioned, but it's mentioned in the other offerings where it doesn't make sense. So it's not a complete answer. So it would be sort of like me saying something was really hip. You know, I mean, some of you would look at me like, what are you talking about? And actually, even for me to say that, probably most of you have no idea what the origin of that is. Are you talking about a hip bone, or what? You know, does that have to do with some sort of a dance movement, or what is that? And actually, the word hip comes actually from the African American community clear back in the 1800s. And we know it came from there, but we don't even know how it originated or what that means. So there are these phrases, there are these expressions that are embedded in the text, and so sometimes we read things and we just simply don't know what they're talking about. We have advantages in the New Testament because there are lots and lots of things that were written during the same time, other documents that are non-scriptural that we can read, we can study those, and we go, oh, that's what that's talking about. And even today, we're learning more and more about some phrases. There's some phrases in the New Testament that we thought meant one thing that now we see, oh, that's not what that means. That's different, and so we're understanding that. But it's difficult with the Old Testament because there aren't a lot of ancient texts to compare it to. It was really a wonderful discovery to find the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was really helpful, but those even themselves are very, very limited. And it's not extra biblical sources. There are some, but not a lot. So that's part of the challenge of this. And it reminds us and compels us that anytime we study something, we need to keep Jesus as the litmus paper for our understanding of who God is. And when we read something and they're talking about something and we say, that sounds confusing, I don't really understand that. And so then we need to look at the teachings of Christ and say, oh, okay. So he's clarifying what God is like. And a lot of people have come to erroneous conclusions about the nature of God based on the Old Testament texts, simply because they're misunderstood or because God is speaking to them in a current situation in where they are. And so Jesus coming really clarifies a lot of that. And so the picture that Jesus paints of the Father is the picture in the image of the prodigal son. It's a great image that God is there. He's the great rescuer. He loves us. The phrases where it says, God so loved the world. Those are the images that clarify the pictures of the Old Testament. So in the story of the Exodus, we have a group of people that are oppressed, and for really the first time in history, the Creator God intervenes. And this is a remarkable, remarkable story. And many people consider the book of Exodus to be the first book of the Bible, and they say that Genesis is sort of the prologue or the preamble to the beginning of the story, which is Exodus. And in Exodus, God appears and engages with these people and ultimately rescues them. Now, in some senses, that's frustrating to people because they think that since God did that once, he should always be doing that. That every time there's an issue, there's this huge part of me. I mean, justice is so huge in me that I just often see situations and I say, can't we just have another Moses? Can't we just have another miracles? Can't we just call plagues and hail down upon those people and fix this? And we need to remember that this was a one-time thing that God did. He was illustrating how things were supposed to be, but he made it very clear that he was raising up a people to do this. That his solution to the problems of the world wasn't that he was going to come in like Moses again with wrath and plagues and drama and fix things. He was creating a people to do that. And what we discover in the New Testament is that the methods that they use are not methods of violence and destruction, but there's a much stronger, more powerful resource that we have, and that's the resource of love and compassion. Way more powerful in transforming people's lives. One of the big, let me back up. And so this is a story of God entering into this situation where these people were being oppressed. And it is a story of the conflict between an oppressed people and the oppressors. It is a story of deliverance from oppression. It's a story of money and power. And this is one of the very few historical instances that was written by the oppressed people. The vast majority of historical documents are written by those that did the oppressing. They're written by the conquerors. And in this instance, this story was written by those who had been conquered, who had been abused, had been overcome. They were in slavery, they were in bondage, and they're the ones writing the story. So it's incredibly interesting from that perspective. And it should also make you look at any history text and say, yeah, what is not being recorded here? Because oppressors tend to write from their perspective. Oppressors, those who are in power, tend to write and make things look really good from their side of the story. And now as we're learning, as we go back and even look at some of the beginnings of our country and some of the people that we thought were wonderful people, turns out they're not always so wonderful. So this is a confrontation between God and the gods of Egypt. And there are two things that are very, very important in this journey that we're in. First of all is really understanding who this God is and completely clarifying and understanding the context of the story. But we also need to understand what he was opposed to. And there are two main things that I want to talk about this morning that God was in opposition to that have infected all of us. That have infiltrated our lives. The Apostle Paul talks about us walking around in a world that is filled with these forces that are oppressing us, and that Satan walks around like a roaring lion seeking those who he might deceive and destroy. And he said, we're in the midst of that. It's all around us. So what do those things look like? And I think typically when we think about the forces of evil, we think about things like drugs, we think about prostitution or abuse or murder or crime, or even Christians that are doing bad things. And we think, yeah, that's the evil in our world. But the evil that God was confronting in Egypt didn't look like that. It was power and money. So how does that relate to us? I was driving back from a firewood delivery yesterday with the herd ladies, and this kid went zooming by in a little what do you call those? Roadster, a little roadster. Beautiful little roadster. And I thought, wow, what a beautiful little car. And I started thinking about how important cars are to us and how important it is in a car to go fast and to be in front and to have this sense of power. This sense that when I'm driving, that I want to be in front, or if somebody comes up and wants to get in front of me, cut me off, there's this sense of, Or if somebody's right on my tail and they're pushing me and I'm feeling like, they're in my space. They're bothering me. So there is this sense in which I want to be in control of my life. I want to be the one that's in charge of everything. I want the one that's making all the decisions. I want to be the one that's in control. I don't want anyone else to do that. another way that that's reflected, I thought of, is in our sport activities. I think it's fine to be involved in sports and to watch sports. I watched the Seahawks lose. And, I think there is a part of us that identifies with that because of that power thread. And we want to win because that touches that chord in us of power and control, that we are on the winning side. I think we should be able to watch sports and not really care who wins. I mean, it's fine to be supportive of your team, but you should be able to appreciate what the other team's doing as well. I was watching a game yesterday, and I don't remember who it was, but one of the opposing guys ended up clear off the field, stumbled around and turned around and sat on the opposing bench. I don't know if any of you saw that. And he looked, and here's the two opposing guys, and he's sitting on the bench with it. It would have been a great picture. I don't know if anybody got that. It was a great picture. He kind of looked around, they got up and walked back on the field. But I thought, and I've seen guys on the field who got cut off or whatever and knocked down, and they turn up and they laugh, and they turn around and they say, yeah, good job, you got me that time. And that's really the way our coach teaches. He teaches that it's supposed to be fun. And I love that about Pete Carroll. And that's the way that we should see sports, or that's the way that we should participate in sports, that this is something, yeah, we can participate in, but ultimately it doesn't really matter if I'm part of the power of the winning. You see that little ugly thread that's in there? And it can lead into other areas of our life. We think, well, that's not a really big deal, but that can influence other areas, like arguments or rights or who's in charge of the situation. And we certainly can see it on the political realm. And I've been thinking more and more, we need to elect people who are in office because they want to serve humanity, not because they want to be in power over humanity. And you see the danger of that, the horror of that. And it's true in the church as well. Throughout the history of the church, there have been many occasions of abuse of power. The other issue that God was opposed to was wealth. And there's nothing wrong with wealth. But having wealth makes it very, very difficult to trust God. Makes it very difficult. I suppose that you with me have often heard about somebody who won the lottery and fantasized for a minute what you would do. I mean, you'd be lying if you hadn't done that. We've all done that. What would I do if I won $50 million? Well, I'm sure I would give most of it to the poor, and I would give all of you a few dollars. But you see, when I lust after winning the lottery, what I am lusting after is money giving me the security that God is supposed to give me. And when you in any way think that your problems will be solved if I just had a raise, or if I somehow came upon a suitcase full of money, or if I won the lottery, or if I had a rich uncle die, if any way you imagine that would solve some of your problems, you're being deluded by the gods of Egypt. Because that's what the gods of Egypt said. They said, if we have the power and if we have the money, we'll have the security and we'll have the pleasures of life. And we'll have all these people that we've oppressed, and they'll serve us. And we have the money, and the money will provide us with the security and the pleasures that we know. I heard a quote from a rich person that once said, those that say you can't buy happiness don't know where to shop. And I've quoted that to you before. But that shows the shallowness of their understanding of what happiness is. Yeah, it might make you feel good for an hour or two to have some wealth. But that deep satisfaction of life that Jesus talks about does not come from wealth. In fact, Jesus said it time and time again, if you imagine that wealth will give you security, or if you imagine that wealth will give you deep satisfaction, then you're deluded. And you're falling into the trap of the gods of Egypt. And I tell you, friends, I believe the churches, especially in North America, are filled with people who are still worshiping the gods of Egypt. Power and wealth. And sadly, I'm very, very reticent to criticize any other preacher of the gospel, but I think that there are some pastors that have been influenced by that and have justified their own worship of the gods of Egypt and turned it into some sort of a different kind of a message. And we need to be very, very careful of that. And I think in North America, we are more susceptible than maybe anywhere else in the world, because our lives are so intertwined with power and wealth. So God rescues these people from Egypt. He brings them up to the mountain, and now we're just about back to where we left off in December. And this is as far as I'm going to go with you today. But I want you to remember these things. I want you to be thinking about the gods of Egypt. And I want you to think about one other thing that I sort of started with, and that is that God is doing all this not just to rescue a people, but to rescue a planet. This is part of his great rescue plan to create a people to rescue the world, spiritually and even physically. Because it wasn't just in spiritual bondage, physical bondage these people were in, they were in spiritual bondage as well. Because they had no idea who the God of the Creator was. They'd heard of their ancestor Abraham that had some kind of an encounter with this Creator God, but they had no idea who he was until Moses came walking out of the wilderness and said, I saw God, he was in the bush. And even Moses had no clue as to who this God was. So this is a journey for them to understand who this God is. This is also a journey for them to move beyond all of the misunderstanding that they had grown up with their whole life about who God is. And we're there too. Every one of us has grown up with misunderstandings about who God is. A lot of right understandings, but all of us have some misunderstanding. So we're trying to ferret those out in this journey. But what is very, very important is to remember that God is raising up a people to be part of a movement. And I was thinking about especially the evangelical church, that we are very, very much involved in the spiritual salvation of people, and we spend a lot of time talking about people that need to become changed and become followers of Jesus Christ, and that's pretty much the end of our message. By and large, the message that we teach is that what's most important is that you say certain words, that you attend to a certain doctrine so they'll end up in heaven. That's the end of our message. And so we have a lot of people that say, yeah, I said those words. I trusted Christ my Savior. Has that changed your life in any way? Are you involved in any way in rescuing this planet or the people of this planet? Well, no, not so much. It's not really my thing. But I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And I have to say, yeah, that follower of Jesus Christ is part of a subversive movement to change people in this planet. It has to affect how you are a citizen of this country. It has to affect how your politics. It has to affect how you treat people of other ethnicities. It has to affect how you treat the people that are coming to this world, the people that live all around us. It's a life-changing event. It's not simply saying that I agree with some doctrinal statements. And I have to ask myself every single day, what am I doing today? What am I doing this week? That's part of that great plan of rescue that God's doing. And if I don't ask God what my part is, I may just end up sitting and not even being a part of it. And then can I really call myself a follower of this great revolutionary Jesus Christ? This morning, we're going to celebrate communion. And there's a great phrase in Corinthians that I think has often been distorted. And Paul says, don't participate in communion if in an unworthy manner. And I think that we've often interpreted that, well, I said some bad words this week, I probably shouldn't do communion, or I had some lustful thoughts, I probably shouldn't do communion, or I went and saw a movie that I read a book. Actions. And we say, well, that makes me not really, I'm not eligible for communion. I don't think that's what Paul's talking about at all. Because if those things made us ineligible, nobody here would get to celebrate communion any Sunday. Honestly, if we could have a mind detector and I walked around the room, we'd all be in trouble, myself included. But I think what Paul is saying is that we need to be sure that what we're celebrating truly is what Christ intended in this. And I think what he's saying to his disciples, he says, you know what, this is the beginning of something really amazing that's going to happen. It's not just my death, it's my resurrection. And this is the beginning of a transformation of this planet. And celebrate this with me. My body is broken so that we can begin this great revolution. My blood is spilled so that we can begin this great resolution. And Pentecost is going to come to give you the power and the ability to do things that you'll never be able to do on your own. As you're involved in this great revolution, the Spirit of God will make you do things. It'll make you stand up in front and, like Bill did, and say things that you never imagined you'd be a public speaker. And it's not something you need to be terrified about. It's something that you should be excited about, because he transforms you to make you able to do that. So I'm going to invite the elders to come.